What is up, my fellow nonfiction readers? Today, I will be discussing the collection of short stories, Naked, by David Sedaris. Naked is a collection of stories about David Sedaris' life. He describes his extreme OCD when he was in middle school that includes licking and touching certain objects, as well as counting his steps. If he forgets to do any of those things, he is unable to focus and forces himself to go back and lick whatever it is he needs to lick. As he grows up, he tells us the comical stories his parents have shared with him, his mother's battle with cancer, and allows us to see the effect his father has had on him and the choices he makes. Sedaris also describes his adventures while hitchhiking, his inability to get a job other than selling marijuana, and the discovery of his homosexuality. His stories are so humorous because they are so honest and always provide an insight into human nature. In the chapter Planet of the Apes, David describes his hitchhiking adventures and the reason he decides to hitchhike in the first place. David is at the movies, and he asks his dad to come pick him up. That left only my father. "I'll be there in 5 minutes," he said. I called back an hour later, and he answered saying, "I'm on my way out the door right this minute." A studio audience laughed and hooted from my father's end of the phone. The situation comedies had started. This meant he'd been asleep in his chair. He would sit there snoring until someone tried to change the channel. "What are you doing?" he'd yell. "I was watching that." It was even worse on weekend afternoons, when you'd call for a ride and hear nothing in the background. This meant he was watching golf. Hours of silence, interrupted every so often by the commentator whispering, "It's been a bogey, bogey, double bogey for Hogan, who's 9 over par coming into the 4th hole here at Oakland Hills." You could outgrow your clothing waiting for my father to pick you up. I called a third time, and when he answered, groggy and confused, "David who?" he asked. "What movie? Where?" Although his father did eventually pick him up, this was David's breaking point in a way. He had always been criticized and pushed to the side by not only his parents, but all the adult figures in his life. And this interaction with his father pushes him over the edge, and thus, he decides to start hitchhiking instead of waiting around for his parents. I started hitchhiking on a regular basis. Aside from the convenience, I enjoyed spending time with people who knew nothing about me. I was free to reinvent myself, trying on whichever personality happened to suit my mood. I was a Broadway actor studying the regional accent for an upcoming show, or maybe a California high school student, here to track down the father I'd never known. Word has it, he goes by the name T-Bone. But that's all I have to go on. David's desire to be someone he's not is a significant insight into human nature. He desires to be someone new because his current life is so comical, to the reader that is, that he wants to escape and be accepted by another human. Another aspect of human nature David plays with is our attachment to our parents. Whether we realize it or not, we carry many memories, pieces of advice, or whatever it may be with us that we have learned from our parents. David's dad is a glass half empty kind of guy, and the stories he told David always seemed to end up in the worst possible scenario, and thus created the impression on David that no matter what he did, something bad was going to happen. In junior high, I signed up for shop class, and our first assignment was to build a napkin holder. "You're not going to use a table saw, are you?" my father asked. I knew a guy, a kid about your size, who was using a table saw when the blade came loose, flew out of the machine, and sliced his face right in half. Using his index finger, my father drew an imaginary line from the forehead to his chin. The guy survived, but nobody wanted anything to do with him. Now how did this affect David? On one of his hitchhiking adventures, he was picked up by 2 young men in a Jeep who introduced themselves as Starsky and Hutch. They arrive at the gas station when David starts to worry. I brought a bag of potato chips and a block of something fudge-like and returned to the car just as Starsky was replacing the gas cap. "Jump in, Chief." He had the attendant headed our way to accept payment, but just as the man reached the pump, Starsky peeled out of the station, driving over a concrete embankment and onto the interstate. "I'm not sure how cool this is," Randolph said. "What about the police?" "Police?" Starsky turned to look behind him. "Hey ho, buddy, we can outrun the police. No fucking problemo." He stomped on the gas pedal, and the Jeep advanced much like a plane moments before taking to the air. This is how people die. This is exactly how it happens, David thought. Although the situation might not be ideal, it is certainly not rational to think that he's going to die. As a result of human nature, he immediately jumps to the worst possible conclusion. Because of the stories his dad has told him, and the psychological effect those have had on him, David worries about everything, and is now a glass half empty kind of guy, to say the least. David Sedaris investigates many aspects of human nature through his humorous recounts of his life. He suggests that anything our parents say and do stick with us through our lives, whether we want them to or not. He also demonstrates how essential it is in life to be cared for. Even if it is just listening to his made-up story, David wants to matter to someone and be accepted for whomever it is he decides to be.